because the United States no longer has anything economic to offer other countries. It has one thing to offer. We will refrain from bombing you and from destabilizing your economy if you do what we say. This is a fight to the end. It wants to end the Iranian self determination, end Iranian sovereignty, and make it into a colony. And Trump has said, just as he personally appointed the new head of Venezuela, he insists that he appoint the new head of Iran after the people rise up and overthrow their government and reestablish a police torture state such as they had under the Shah, so that America can just kill, torture, and get rid of any Iranian who disagrees with this. I can't tell what the Chinese government position is all of this. It's trying to be absolutely silent on what its strategy is, but it reads the newspapers. It listens to what the government officials in the United States say, and it knows that the United States is preparing for war on it. The United States is trying to use Islamic terrorists in Xinjiang and the Uyghurs to try to destabilize it. The United States is planning mass sabotage, is trying to block Chinese exports to other countries. It's forced Europe to say the Chinese are a different race. We must not permit any Chinese firm to own more than a 50% ownership of any business in Europe, because we want to keep them out. It's treating them in the same way that the Ukrainians are treating Russian speakers as subhumans. To the United States, China is like the Palestinians are to Israel. There is a race hatred here.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Another episode now we have with Michael Hudson. So we can delve into more of the economic side of the global political economic situation. And normally, Michael, I would start off by asking a somewhat detailed question. But given the situation today, my inclination is simply to ask you, what the hell is going on?
Well, detailed questions are the best because so much is going on that I'm not sure
Yeah.
what to say. The big picture is what's happening now is a plan that was put in place more than 20 years ago. Already in 2003, General Wesley Clark said we're going to attack five countries in 7 years, capped with Iran. The centerpiece of all American economic diplomacy has been the role of oil in world trade. That's been the case for 100 years because the United States knows that all countries of the world need oil, not only for power, for their electricity, but to make fertilizer out of natural gas and chemicals. And if the United States can control the world's oil trade, then it can control a choke point because everybody needs oil. And it can simply turn off the oil spigot to countries that don't follow American foreign policy. So that's exactly what it did with Russia. When after Russia retaliated to the NATO attack on it via Ukraine, the U.S. imposed sanctions on Russian oil, and the U.S. Foreign policy based on oil is number one. You cannot, no country can buy oil from any other supplier not controlled by the United States. So the United States, first of all, isolated Iran after they overthrew the Shah, blocking Iran's oil sales. Then it blocked Russia so that no country could buy oil and gas from Russia, even Europe that needed Russian gas and oil for its own industry. That was blocked. And then Venezuela. was blocked because Venezuela resisted America's control. So America wanted to make sure that no country could obtain oil from anyone else so that Trump could come in, or any American president, and say, we will put trade sanctions against you and prevent you from buying oil to run your factories and heat your homes and make your chemical industry run if you don't follow our directions, subsidize the American economy, join our military alliance, let us put military bases in your countries. And not only uh, does America need to control oil, but as in the case of OPEC, since 1974, it realizes it doesn't have to actually have U.S. companies or the United States own the oil resources. All it needs to do is control all the export proceeds from these oil exports. And the deal that was made in 1974 between the United States and OPEC when it quadrupled its oil prices in response to America quadrupling its grain export prices under CART, its grain export prices. The response was you can charge whatever you want for the oil, and the higher price you charge, the more this is going to benefit American oil companies because this is a price umbrella enabling us to make more profits on our domestic production. But you have to invest all of the dollars that you earn, and you have to price your oil in dollars, you have to invest it all in buying U.S. bonds and stocks. The money that you earn, you have to buy U.S. Treasury securities or corporate bonds, or put your money, lend it to American banks. And these were the so-called petrodollars, earnings from oil that had to be spent in the United States, blocked currency. It wasn't just resources and dollars owned by the OPEC countries. It was earnings that were limited and had to be spent in the United States or domestically, largely by buying imports from the United States to rebuild its economy. Well, that's the situation with Iran now. And the setting is exactly the same. The United States wants to have a regime change in Iran, to have an Iranian equivalent of Boris Yeltsin installed, who will essentially follow U.S. directions and let the U.S. oil companies take control, or have a domestic Iranian oil company actually administer control as a kind of client oligarchy or client state, very much like Saudi Arabia and all of the Emirates around in the Arab OPEC countries. And Iran is then going to be using its oil export proceeds not to send to China, not to sell to other countries that are deemed enemies of the United States, headed by China, but only to countries that the United States approves of. And the basic model for what the United States wants to do in Iran is just exactly what Trump has done in the last few months in Venezuela. The Venezuelans can produce the oil, but Trump is all the oil proceeds have to put in a bank account in Florida, and Trump is in charge personally of the bank account, and will decide, well, how much money are we actually going to give Venezuela for its oil, and the rest of the money, well, we're going to spend on whatever we want, on a pseudo investment, a sort of claim. Yes, the ostensibly Venezuela has a deposit; it's being used for something, but this money that it's left in the bank may not be earning anything at all. So essentially, the United States has seized Venezuela's export earnings, and Trump has said, just as he personally appointed the new head of Venezuela, he insists that he appoint the new head of Iran, after the people rise up and overthrow their government and reestablish a police torture state, such as they had under the Shah, so that America can just kill, torture, and get rid of any Iranian who disagrees with this, just as the Shah had one of the worst torture states in the Middle East. So, needless to say, Iran is not going to be doing any of this, and it realizes that this finally the U.S. attack on Iran that has been planned for more than 20 years, upgraded and refined year after year. How are we going to do it? That this is a fight to the end. It wants to end the Iranian self determination, end Iranian sovereignty, and make it into a colony, sort of like Puerto Rico or Haiti or Germany or England, that it doesn't have any ability to run its own country. Well, the
Michael,
Iranians, yes,
could I interrupt to ask a question
sure.
about that? Because I've been curious since the kidnapping of President Maduro, exactly what the relationship is like. Because initially, the message from the Venezuelans was very clear that Delcy Rodriguez was the constitutionally appointed second in line. And since the president had been kidnapped, they were just following normal constitutional procedure. Now, of course, Trump and his administration has been saying, "Oh, we control them, we run Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera," and you can see how, because they can just, like pirates, take over any oil tanker leaving Venezuela. If it's going to Cuba, they can say, "No, it's not going to Cuba anymore. We're sending it to Israel or wherever we want to send it." But my question is, from what you've been hearing and reading, to what extent do you think that the Venezuelan government under Delcy Rodriguez is actually following or playing ball with the Trump administration and the U.S. empire, and to what extent are they essentially in a position where they have no choice? Maybe they attempt to push back in the little areas that they have some ability to do so, but I just don't see like what kind of power they would have to do otherwise than what Trump tells them, since he's in charge of the pirate force that can take over their oil tankers. Do you
That's
have
ex-
a clear sense of that?
Yeah, you're correct. They obviously, if they did have a choice, they would want to uh, export their oil to countries that were friendly to them. They would want to do what they were doing before. They would want to sell their oil to China. They would want to sell their oil to Cuba. They would want to sell their oil for something other than dollars, because the United States can simply grab whatever dollar assets they have and confiscate them, just like the United States and Europe grabbed all of Russia's $300 billion in savings in the West. It's very dangerous to have your savings in U.S. bonds or stocks or banks deposits if you do something that the administration doesn't like trading with China. And America has said there's one sanction that any ally has to have. You have to declare war on China. They are our enemy. We must hurt the Chinese economy. We must deprive it of oil. We have to prevent it from using the financial system to trade and invest with the West. That hasn't worked because China's developed its own system, and it's developed its own source of oil from Russia. The United States is trying to prevent China from getting oil from Russia by seizing Russian oil tankers that would have sold its oil to Russia. So all of this seeming fight against Iran is a fight against China with the intention of going to war with China. That's why I can't tell what the Chinese government position is all of this. It's trying to be absolutely silent on what its strategy is, but it reads the newspapers. It listens to what the government officials in the United States say, and it knows that the United States is preparing for war on it. The United States is trying to use Islamic terrorists in Xinjiang and the Uyghurs to try to destabilize it. The United States is planning mass sabotage, is trying to block Chinese exports to other countries. It's forced Europe to say the Chinese are a different race. We must not permit any Chinese firm to own more than a 50% ownership of any business in Europe because we want to keep them out. It's treating them in the same way that the Ukrainians are treating Russian speakers as subhumans. To the United States, China is like the Palestinians are to Israel. There is a race hatred here. My wife is Asian, but she's not Chinese. She's spit upon in the subways. People telling her go back to China. There's you can't imagine the race hatred that is being stirred up in the United States to block any attempt to trade interaction with China, even to the extent of preventing American and European companies from buying Chinese windmill blades. China is the main producer of wind energy machinery. All of that has been blocked in the United States. The United States has blocked the importation of Chinese solar panels. So this is again fits into its control of energy. Trump has said we are blocking in every international meeting, from the Paris Accords to others, the climate accords. We're trying to prevent any alternative energy except oil, trying to prevent wind energy or solar energy or atomic energy even. We want to have the whole world dependent on oil under our control so that we can turn off the spigot and prevent Chinese industry and industry of any countries that are part of China's economic orbit from operating. So this is what I think the Chinese are quite aware of. And I think they realize that, well, the America needs China more than China needs America and access to the American market. America is dependent on China's exports of rare earth magnets, of gallium, of all sorts of raw materials that China has developed refinery capacity in. It's dependent on a lot of Chinese technology, and China has the ability to respond to America's weaponization of the oil trade, just in the same way that America's doing. It can say, well, if you really want to block our access to the West, if you want to prevent our investing there, then fair is fair. You can't invest enough in our either. I think it's best we each go our own ways. Maybe that's the way for peace. You go your way, we'll go our way. Why do we have to fight? You want to isolate us from the rest of the world? Well, we're happy to isolate ourselves from the U.S. economy and let the rest of Asian countries, African countries, South American countries, and the global South deciding who do we want to have most of our export planning and our forward economic planning associated with. Do we want to base our own foreign trade and investment in the years to come on a growing economy, such as China, an industrial socialist economy, or with a shrinking financialized finance capitalist economy, such as the United States, that's shrinking? Well, obviously, the economic interest of all countries would be to avoid the shrinking U.S. market in favor of the growing market of East Asia, China, and its neighbors. This is what the United States is trying to prevent. And Iran is only one a segment of all of this. It's already pried Venezuela away from its linkage with China. It's trying to block Russia from its supply of seaborne trade with China, and now it's trying to block Iranian trade with China. All of this control of Iran, Venezuela, an attempt to control of Russia is an attempt to isolate China, thinking that China and other countries can't exist without access to the United States market. And that's the almost hilarious fiction that underlies American policy, the belief that other countries need the American market more than the United States needs other countries. And of course, it needs other countries because it's deindustrialized, it's offshored its industry to China and Asia and other countries in order to focus on making money financially, not making money by industrial development. So America, really since the 1980s, has pursued a policy of deindustrialization, thinking that it's easier to make a fortune financially by the stock market and bond market and by creating bank credit to bid up prices for real estate, prices for stocks and bonds, and make money by increasing the prices of real estate and stocks and bonds to so that people who own stocks and bonds, mostly the wealthiest 10% of the population, can get rich. And that's what's happened, especially since 2008. Almost all the growth in wealth in the United States has come accrued to the wealthiest 10% in the form of rising financial prices for stocks, bonds, and real estates. For 40% of the American population can't save any money at all, and they're further and further in debt. And the bottom 60% of the American population has only about, they cannot meet a sudden demand on their income for more than $500. They can't afford any kind of a shock without going deeper into credit card debt or other bank debt. And so you have the American workers, the employees, the bulk of the American population is further and further in debt to banks, to credit card companies, to automobile loan companies to have an auto to drive to work, to education loans. For all of these, their debts are going up, not their assets. And all of the assets going up are stocks and bonds and by the creditor class, the wealthiest 10%, and their assets are claims on the debts of the 90%. So the American economy is polarizing. Nothing like this occurs in China because China doesn't have an independent financial class. What China has done is what industrial capitalism wanted to do in the late 19th century: make money and credit and banking a public utility whose purpose was to fund industrial investment, capital formation, to fund economic infrastructure, to provide basic services to the population freely or on a subsidized basis. Education, healthcare, natural monopolies such as transportation, communication. China has done exactly what the United States and Germany did in the late 19th century to industrialize. And the United States says, well, that's socialism, that's the enemy. But in the 19th century, this industrial policy was called socialism. John Stuart Mill in 1848, in Principles of Political Economy, essentially followed what were called the Ricardian socialists. The whole idea of capitalism was to free European and other economies from the results of feudalism. They wanted to get rid of a landlord class. They wanted to get rid of the monopolies created to pay war debts, and they wanted to to change banking away from the kind of predatory banking that was done in England to the kind of banking you begin to see in Germany, where you had a three-part triangular unity between the German government, the German banks, and German heavy industry, where the German banks would provide money to the industrial corporations of Germany to make capital investment. And while the British and American and British style banking would all say, well, if you make a profit, we'll pay it out as dividends to the stockholders. The German bank said, no, we don't want the dividends. We want you to keep reinvesting your profits to increase your industrial power, and we'll own more and more productive claims on your productive investment so that you can pay interest out of all of these profits that you're making on using our credit to make capital investment. That's not what happened after World War One. All of the West sort of ended up not following the German and the socialist model. There was a whole reaction against classical economics as the financial interests and the real estate interests and the raw materials interests like oil and mining all joined together to essentially change the whole character of capitalism away from what Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and Karl Marx had explained. Well, Marx described all of this in volumes 2 and 3 of Capital, and he expected that capitalism was going to evolve into socialism, and that's what the capitalists expected. There were many kinds of socialism in the late 19th century, and but all of them saw a rising role of government. Well, what you've seen in the West, and this has to do with Iran, what you've seen in the West since the 1980s is that there's been a fight against government. There's been an attempt by the financial sector to privatize all of this public investment that had occurred. In Britain, Margaret Thatcher essentially privatized council housing. Real estate costs went way up, so high that Britain could no longer be an industrial power because its labor force had to pay so much money for rent. Britain sold off its telephone company as its first monopoly. That's all privatized. Telephone prices went up. It sold off all of its water. And so water prices went way up, and the companies that raised all of the prices on water, like Thames Water is the typical case here. They simply paid all of the profits they were making, I should say economic rents they were making by simply raising prices and getting monopoly rents. They paid it all to the financial buyers of these water companies. They didn't provide more water. They didn't repair the pipes. They just took the sewage and began feeding sewage for water to the British population. And so the whole British economy has been destroyed by financialization. And something similar has occurred in the United States under Ronald Reagan. So the result of all of this deindustrialization of the United States, of Britain, of European countries has been there's no more public sector to provide the basic needs for the population anymore, and as a result, the wages have remained pretty stable since, meaning they haven't moved since 2008, but the cost of living has gone way up. The cost of housing has gone way up. The cost of medical care has gone way up. All the payments to the financial and real estate sector and to monopolies have gone way up, leaving less and less income for American wage earners to spend on the products that they're actually making in factories. And so there's less and less employment. In the last year, the first year of the President Trump's second term, industrial employment fell by about 100,000 in the United States. So the United States has a problem. How is it going to continue to get rich for its wealthiest classes without without being able to produce its own industrial self-sufficiency, and without becoming more and more dependent having outsourced all its employment, it needs tribute. And so it says, well, if we can control world monopolies, if we can take control of all of the oil, then we can do for oil what we've done for other monopolies. We'll create an oil trust, basically, and we'll keep raising the prices of oil and force these countries to send all of the profits they make on oil to the United States. And we'll just live off tribute. We'll create a new form of colonialism, a new form of imperialism, but it's not going to be military. Because we won't need it, because we have almost 800 military bases all around the world. We have the threat of military power to bomb you if you don't follow what we do. And this is the attempt that you're seeing in Iran right now. Iran is the country, more than any other, that's fought back. Iran has said, we're not going to be part of this. We want our control of our own oil, not like what you have in Venezuela, where President Trump gets to decide how the oil revenues are spent. And so America is trying to bomb Iran. Well, it hasn't worked because Iran has been anticipating this for more than ever since 1979, when it overthrew the Shah's dictatorship. It's been putting in place its own missile system, its own military arms system, and its arms are superior to the United States because unlike the United States Army, Iran's arms are meant to actually fight in a war. The Americans have spent an enormous amount of money on military. This year, Trump has said we need to increase the military budget from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion, and he just added another $200 billion for to finance to rebuild all of the missiles and the bond and the aircraft that have been lost in the war with Iran so far. So you're having this dependency result, and it's apparently not going to work because Trump expected we're going to bomb Iran and Iran's going to surrender. Well, Iran didn't surrender, and it's fought back, and it's used its missiles to drive the United States out of the Middle East. It says you've occupied the Middle East, replacing Britain in the Middle East since World War One. The only reason you're here is trying to control us and prevent us from becoming a sovereign country. And so we're going to stop the whole oil trade. And if we can't export our oil, then none of the other OPEC countries are going to be able to export their oil. The sheikdoms in these countries, these Arab sheikdoms, are autocratic dictatorships of just a few ruling families with a labor force that's almost entirely immigrants. Living on low subsistence wages that are treated as adversaries, just as human cattle to be used. These are awful dictatorships, and with a very wealthy class on top, 1%, and then the whole rest of the population working. And all of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, are all based on economic ties with the United States, because under the 1974 agreements, they've had to promise to put all of their investments in the United States. And the Arab OPEC countries have been buying into automatic intelligence companies, all sorts of the leading stock market, new industries and monopolies that are being created. The OPEC countries have played a major role in investments in the U.S. stock market, and they've now let the large automatic intelligence companies, from Amazon to Facebook and others, to build huge computer processing plants in their countries to use their electricity to drive these enormous quantum computing factories. Well, Iran says as long as your economic ties are with the United States, you're going to essentially fight not only your own population, but you're going to fight us. Because that's what the United States is telling you to do because it's holding you hostage. So you have to, number one, end your economic symbiosis, your relationship with the United States. Number two, you have to stop investing in U.S. Treasury bonds. You have to stop giving your oil export earnings, and most of all of the accumulated national savings and foreign exchange savings that are invested in U.S. bonds. You have to stop your ties with the United States, just as the United States has told us to stop our ties with Russia. Well, we're turning the tables on you. We're going to make the same demand on you that you've demanded from us. Don't trade with the United States. And if you do that, we're going to bomb all of your oil and gas exports. And they've already bombed Qatar's gas exports. So the whole world gas trade has already been stopped for 5 years, which is what it will take to replace the $1 billion plant that has been liquefying Qatari natural gas to be sold abroad, mainly to Asia. This is stifling the Korean economy, the Japanese economy. It's stifling the economies of America's leading allies. And so, what's happened is a trauma for all of these countries that have been willing to pay tribute to the United States all these years, to follow American foreign policy. The European countries that are in industrial depression, headed by Germany and Holland, the Asian countries, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines, that are dependent on natural gas that Iran has turned off. Iran has said, if you continue to side with the United States against us and our allies, Russia and China, then your economies will go into a Great Depression, just as bad as the 1930s. Your economic growth is over. It will shrink. You have a choice. Either you can resume growth by breaking from your links with the United States, or you can continue to depend on the United States. You will not have energy. You'll have to close down your chemical industry, close down your fertilizer industry. You will not have fertilizer to increase your crop yields. You will not have gas to make sulfur for your chemical industry. You will not have helium that you need for cryogenic low temperature freezing to uh, etch your computer chips at very low temperatures so that the computer laser won't just sort of spread out in a warm silicon wafer. You're not going to be able to participate in the computer progress or anything else. Your economy is going to shrink, and you'll probably be overthrown by your voters unless you become an autocracy like the European Union and Britain are trying to create, and like the United States is trying to create. So this is a civilizational fight. This is a fight in Iran that's going to determine what shape is the world economy going to take. And in order to create an alternative, there has to be a systemic institutional change. In other words, there has to be something to replace the United Nations. The United Nations was supposed to be the enforcer of international law, uh, uh, based on the principle of national sovereignty. No country, like the United States, could interfere with the political relations of other countries. That was the case ever since 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia in Germany that ended the 30 Years' War established certain principles of international law. And these were refined by the United Nations Charter in 1945. All of these principles of the United Nations Charter have been broken by the United States and Israel. All of the laws of war, you're not allowed to bomb civilians and focus on civilians in war. That's a war crime. You're not allowed to focus on bombing hospitals or basic infrastructure. That's a war crime. You're not allowed to mount a military attack without provocation. That's a war crime. Uh, uh, there, but there's no international court that is empowered to enforce these laws on the United States, because the United States says we will not join any international organization, whether it's the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. We will not join any organization in which we do not have a veto power. So the whole rest of the world, in order to create an alternative to the American neo-colonialism, requires some kind of enforcement agency in order to, number one, bring a war crimes trial against the United States, Israel, Ukraine, and other U.S. Guilty parties. It needs basically an army to enforce and protect itself from violators of international law. It needs some way of isolating and imposing sanctions on violators of international law, such as the United States imposes on other countries who are trying to enforce international law. The whole world of the United Nations has been turned inside out. So, and other countries need a new United Nations, a new United States International Court, an alternative to the dollar, so the United States and to the euro, so the United States cannot say, well, if you have to save your foreign exchange reserves since we've gone off gold, you have to save it in loans to the United States, so that your savings, we're going to pay dollars into the economy to import from you the industrial products that we're no longer producing ourselves, and to pay for all of our military spending abroad. All of this money we spend, you have to reel to the U.S. government, and we can grab it and say, "Well, ha, you thought you'd saved it all up. It's ours now." Just like it did with Venezuela's gold that was held in
So,
Britain.
if I can jump,
Yeah,
can I jump in
please.
for a moment? So my question is, Michael, you said that we need an alternative system, and I agree. I think the UN is completely useless now. The whole international community is useless. How they deal with the terror of the United States and Israel and allies. So we were all very optimistic about BRICS and about the new multipolar world order, but there also doesn't seem to be a lot of pushback coming from that direction. Do you see any? So currently, I see the only real resistance happening right now in West Asia. To be very honest, Iran, some of the resistance groups. Do you see any development to an alternative that can really push back against the crimes of the West? Because I'm feeling pretty pessimistic at this moment. Maybe I'm seeing things wrongly. What do you think, Michael?
Now I'm on again. Okay.
Yes.
No, I don't see an alternative. And here's the problem: there's a cognitive dissonance of an inability to confront the dynamics that I've been describing, because there's no simple solution. The solution has to be to create a new international economic system. And that's such a large task that other countries cannot figure out, how do we do it alone? And only a few countries can start it. And the few countries would have to be China, Russia, and Iran, and then hope that other countries from the BRICS or from the global South, Africa, South America, that these countries will join it. But there has to be almost like a new manifesto of the international order to redesign an alternative system. You cannot fix the current problem of the world going into energy triggered depression without creating a new system. You can't solve the problem within the existing system of US based international trade and payments based on the US dollar and its weaponization of international finance by the United States, its weaponization of the oil trade. It's turning every international relationship into a weapon system. How can the United States hurt other countries? Because the United States no longer has anything economic to offer other countries. It has one thing to offer. We will refrain from bombing you and from destabilizing your economy if you do what we say. All it has to offer is a threat of not hurting them. Well, this is a pretty unpleasant. Who wants to do business with a country like that? That is against every principle of international law for the last 500 years. It's against the principle of civilization itself. So, what you're seeing now is a fight by the United States and Western Europe, Israel and their allies, and including satellites from Korea and Japan, against the basic principles of civilization. That's what's at stake. Well, no wonder other countries haven't done anything. How on earth do we design what should a world civilization look like? Well, it's all been discussed already. For 400 years, it's been discussed. It was already in the UN Charter. How do we create an institution that will actually enforce these principles of civilization? Well, Iran says, well, one thing we have to do, we have to start with a Nuremberg type war crimes trial. Well, this requires an international court. There isn't one now that's not controlled by the United States. And you remember that when the International Criminal Court accused Israeli President Netanyahu of genocide, the United States made personal attacks on the criminal court justices. It denied any of them access to credit cards anywhere in the world under U.S. control. They couldn't go to a store or travel without credit cards. It blocked their international travel. It seized all of their property in the United States and their bank accounts in the United States and its allies. So it's essentially said, if you judges of the criminal court or the United Nations rapporteur who reported on Israeli genocide and got America angry by essentially calling genocide for what it was, genocide, then we're going to punish your individuals personally. Well, there has to be some way of protection against this, and the only protection there is to isolate the lawbreaker. You can't put a country in jail, but you can isolate its economy and tell its population, if you want to try to be a neo-colonial power and use military threats of creating military destruction or just as bad, economic chaos, economic destruction, then we're not going to have anything. We're going to protect ourselves by isolating ourselves from you because you're trying to weaponize every kind of contact and transaction with us. How are other countries going to actually acknowledge the seriousness of all this? There's a cognitive dissonance. This is too big for our tunnel vision to even comprehend. That's why you and I are having these talks. That's why I was going back and forth to China so often to try to say, this is what you've got to do in order to protect yourself and the economy that you're helping grow so fast. You have to realize that this is what the United States is trying to do to stop you, and what you need to do to protect yourself and all of the countries that you trade with from the U.S. aggression and the European aggression and the Japanese aggression.
Indeed, indeed. That reminds me of something you wrote in a book. I forget which one it was. It was back in the 1970s. And you said something like, it's almost as if these other countries lack a gene for self-preservation. It's like, this dollar hegemony is not in the interest of any country other than the United States, but nonetheless, all of these countries around the world are sustaining it and upholding it. But I think the difference now is that you mentioned the concept of cognitive dissonance. I think maybe back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., the cognitive dissonance wasn't so acute. You could still kind of convince yourself if you're, in Korea or, just name your countries, European countries, countries all over the world, and in Africa, Latin America. You could kind of convince yourself that this is kind of the best system you could hope for, democratic or capitalist democracy, and that having that system led by the US is, it's not really great for us, but it's, maybe it's better than the alternative, and you could just kind of go to sleep and ignore it. But now it seems like the price to pay, the price required for sustaining that system, is ridiculously high for every country in the world that is not the United States. I mean, even Europe is getting screwed uh, dearly by the US. The Gulf state allies are getting screwed even worse, arguably, now. And these are the allies, mind you. If you're an enemy, I mean, you don't really need to say much of anything. India, which was, desperate seemingly to be the US's cat's paw and do whatever the US empire wanted it to do vis-a-vis China, they get screwed too by Trump. So, maybe it is we're getting to a point where countries, leaderships snap, and the collective action problem becomes somewhat easier, or somewhat less difficult to solve, simply because the cost is so high, and now the cognitive dissonance is at such a fever pitch. It kind of forces people to reduce it via
But
it, it's
but
okay. I,
Peter,
I was I was
Peter
wrapping
had a
up.
comment.
I was just saying that perhaps now the cognitive dissonance has reached such an acute pitch that the way to reduce it is not to just go to sleep and accept US domination, but rather to solve the collective action problem and do a new Bretton Woods, a new UN, a new global economic order, hopefully.
Sorry, I muted you again, Michael, because there was an echo, so you have to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Now, you put your finger on the problem, Peter. There's a myth underlying the whole U.S. Cold War order. The United States says you have to be part. Other countries must join us as allies because we are protecting them from the fact that Russia may refight World War II by marching into Europe again. And China may invade other countries. That we're protecting the world from Russia and China as if Russia and China and Iran are threats. Well, Russia and China, Iran are not threatening anyone at all. And in fact, instead of the United States promises that we are providing you with security, the security is against essentially China will buy 1,000 elephants and march like Hannibal on Rome with elephants over the rest of the country. You're not seeing any elephants? Well, we've won. We've defended you against China's 1,000 elephants that it was going to use to lead its armies across Asia. This is the reality. Is that the United States, instead of protecting other countries, is endangering all the other countries' economies and military stability and domestic democracy throughout the world. The United States is the threat, not the protector of other countries. This is what other countries have to realize very explicitly. And they really hate to because so many of their politicians depend on their own money. I've spoken with many Treasury officials over the years, and they've said it's very simple to get other governments to do what we want. little white envelopes filled with money or just payments into their accounts. That's what Bitcoin's for, and other cryptocurrency. The United States has bribed foreign policymakers and politicians. It's been protecting their careers. It's been picking them out in college as talent scouts. What are the students that are sort of brilliant but utterly corruptible and willing to double cross their people, just like Tony Blair in
Epstein
England?
class, the
Yeah,
Epstein class.
yes, yes. This is what they want, and these are the people such as Merz in Germany, and Macron in France, and Starmer in Britain. These are the people who've owed their whole career to the support from the United States by its non-government organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy, which is really fascism, basically, by developed by Trotskyist Russia haters long ago. I knew many of these people, and they're it's an emotional hatred of Russia that begin all of this anti-communist focus of the Cold War spending, and all of that anti-communist, anti-Russian hatred has now shifted and very easily been focused against China, taking on the racial tinge as well, and uh, that's transformed the world economy into just exactly the opposite of what the U.S. had promised and what U.S. rhetoric defends. So, what are you going to believe? Reality or what the United States and its mass media that are all bought up by neocon ad owners are telling you?
Yeah, and I would say it's not only that it's such a big a step for many of the countries to create a new system. I also think there is still just a deep lack of confidence in the formerly colonized world. I really think there is some kind of psychological lack of confidence. For example, I think China can be way more proactive. I feel they're very passive. And I don't know. I think there's a psychological component here that's rooted in colonialism. What do you think, Michael?
I think that's true. I think that's true. There's been no ideological preparation for all of this, especially because China does not. Oh, you're muting me again. Am I muted? Oh,
No, you're
because,
fine.
okay, China doesn't want to explicitly break from the United States at this time for its own reason, because as the U.S. antagonism towards China grows up, it's trying to delay any kind of really harsh response to itself. And there's the old Western maxim: when your enemy is self destructing, don't interfere with them. So I think China is trying to remain silent, and they realize that the American empire is being broken up not by foreign opposition, not by China or Russia or Iran or socialists or any group actually trying to oppose it, but by Donald Trump and the American overreach itself. The Americans attempt to isolate the most rapidly growing, successful economies in the world, such as China and its neighbors and its Belt and Road Initiative. This is forcing other countries simply to defend themselves, and is a catalyst for creating this new economic system that we've been developing.
At any rate, I just wanted to say, Michael, thank you so much for your time. We're at the hour already.
Okay.
Really appreciated talking with you. And if you have any recommendations for listeners to read some of your work, where would you recommend that they go?
Well, a lot of my books are published in Chinese. My super imperialism is supposed to be released in the new translation by Oriental publishers in a few months. I think they're waiting until after. Originally, they were postponing it until after Trump's visit. And now it looks like there won't be a visit, but it's all translated, ready to be published. And the first edition was already published by the government. My books on international trade theory and many of my articles are translated into Chinese, and my work for the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, many of my speeches for that, the papers that I gave for Peking University when I was a professor of economics there for 2 years have been published. I'm often on Chinese media, and of course, my own books. Super Imperialism is the main guide, and also my most what are the Destiny of Civilization is one, and my books on antiquity or others. So I have plenty of books to read, and on my website, michael-hudson.com, I have all of my transcriptions of my discussions.
I was just going to recommend, if you next time you talk with your publisher in China, I would urge them to translate your America's Protectionist Takeoff, because I think that book is would be of particular interest to people in China now, if only they knew it existed.
Well, what they have published is my trade, development, and foreign debt, my lectures on foreign trade and international financial theory that I taught at the New School graduate faculty in the United States in 1969 to 72. So that was translated by professors at Remnen University and published by the government many years ago, and was used as training for the many Chinese classes in trade theory. So again, that's all. In that book, I summarize the American protectionist takeoff, and I
Yeah.
describe a lot of that in my Destiny of Civilization.
Yeah, I remember transcribing the conversation with Michael last time. So this time it's your turn, Peter, and it's quite some work. So good luck.
Send it along. Send it along.
All right, have a good night or a good day. A good night for us.
Good day.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Michael, and see you next time.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
See you next time.
I won't turn it off. Bye bye.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. BettBeat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change, no silence.